Okay, a couple of things that I didn't mention about our filters. Number one is kind of a very important one. Back in the day when we changed a fuel filter, and we changed an oil filter, whatever, we always pre-filled those filters before we put them on the engine, right? What did I just do? Did I put contaminated fuel in and contaminated oil that's going to go in the engine before it goes through the filter, right? So that was never really a good idea. Well, we all did it, and a lot of people still do it. Most of your engine, in fact, I'm going to say all of your engine manufacturers now say we do not do that ever. You always put them on dry, all right? So on the very top, on the very top, we have our sealing gasket, right? You always lubricate up that gasket. Doesn't matter if it's diesel fuel or oil or whatever. Always lubricate that up, because if you don't, a couple of things are going to happen. Number one, this rubber is going to stick to the filter housing, and it's going to be a bear cat to get off of there, all right? And number two is the oil will help seal, or the fuel, diesel fuel. I mean, diesel fuel is just light oil, right? So either one will help it seal, okay? Typically, you're only going to, some of my customers, I mean, they'll spin it on, then they'll get a little strap out and cinch it up, and then they'll get a big strap out, and they put them on way too tight. One full turn, actually 2/3 of a turn is all you need. 2/3 to 3/4 of a turn, that's all you need. If you're putting it on a lot tighter, then you're actually going to start crushing the sides of the canister. You start crushing the sides of the canister, you start crushing the media. You start crushing the media, your filtration just went to heck in a handbasket, all right? So make sure that you tell your producers, if they do brand new filter, I don't give the $100 filter, I don't care. Tell my customers if they crush that filter, it comes off and another one goes on. I don't care if you've never used it, okay? Because you've just ruined the filter, okay? When they do put them on dry, I tell my students and my customers, tell your producers, especially if it's an oil filter, they probably need to disable the engine so that they can actually crank the engine without the engine starting. Because essentially they have to fill up that filter before the oil goes through the lubrication system. You get a lot of air in some of those, some of your oil filters are this gosh darn big. They're huge, okay? They're a 2-quart filter. Well, when I start the engine up, I got 0 oil pressure. Well, if I'm not having much oil pressure, I'm not going to fill out that big old filter very quickly. So now I'm going to start starving my bearings for oil. And that's where we lead to what I call an opportunity for service in my world. That's when we start doing engine overhauls. And your customers or your producers probably don't want to go down that road, okay? So they can pull like a relay, get into the fuse box, get into their owner's manual, figure out where that fuse or the relay is for the fuel system. Might be an electronic pump, or, the injector drivers, whatever. Pop that out of there, crank that engine over. Once they see oil pressure, pop the relay back in, vroom, they're good to go, okay? Fuel systems, it depends upon what the system is. A lot of so if I go back to that very first black engine we looked at, the International down the corner down there, remember that little, on the side of our main pump, we had that little plunger, okay? That's a primer pump, okay? So if you were to put this on dry, then you start priming that, and that will actually physically push the air out, suck the fuel and get the air out of those lines, okay? You guys ever, like in your own experience or your producers, running a diesel engine out of diesel fuel? Kind of sucks, actually. Some systems it really, really sucks, all right? We have a C15 Caterpillar. We're going to see it here a little bit later. And we ran that thing out of fuel, and it actually took us about 4 hours to get that thing primed. It was an absolute bear cat. It was terrible, okay? So now if it's a cold day or a super hot day and you're out, or your producer's out there trying to get that thing bled, they're not going to be very happy. So running out of fuel is not an option, okay? On our newer systems, such as that little engine we had the cutaway on it, a lot of those are actually self-priming. I know that engine for sure because I have these engines in labs. The Cummins ISL, the Cummins ISB, which is in a lot of your ag producers' equipment, you turn the key on for 30 seconds and a little electric fuel pump, and it does what it needs to do. Okay, you may have to do it a couple of times and then you fire it up, vroom, it's still running. Right, so not really a big deal. Okay. This one here, One sensor, actually there's a couple of sensors we need to talk about. I'll talk about the other one first before I lose my train of thought. Inside your fuel tanks is going to be a fuel level sensor, all right? Those are newer engines or newer piece of equipment, not just the engine, but equipment is tied into the ECM. And this one I learned from my brother-in-law. When on a diesel fuel system, fuel is always returned back to the tank. There's only one engine I know of that doesn't, and that's the older 7.3 Power Strokes that were in our Ford pickups. Okay, but every other diesel engine I know of returns fuel back to the tank. So if I am out in the field, I'm cutting my hay, I'm cutting my crop, I'm seeding whatever, on a pretty warm day, my engine's going to start getting pretty warm, right? So my fuel is continuously cycling through. And the reason it cycles through is because we're using diesel fuel as a lubricant inside the injector. Remember, we have a plunger, that body, or we have the body which is not moving. When we have that plunger moving up and down, well, that's two metal components. So I better have some sort of a film in here to lubricate. And it's also used for cooling, because we're not very nice to those injectors. We stuff them on the top of a head, and then we push fuel through them, and there's a big old explosion and a whole lot of heat at the bottom of that injector. So we're not very nice to them. So we're going to have to dispel that heat. Part of the way to do that is with fuel. So we recycle the fuel when it's not injecting it back to the fuel tank. So the fuel tank is actually there. Number one is to store and transport fuel. We kind of figured that out. The second big reason it's there is actually as a heat exchanger. Okay? So when we have the warm fuel going back into the fuel tank, we want to be able to cool that off before we put it back into the engine. Okay? So what one manufacturer has done is that they have figured out that if you get down to a certain level of fuel, you're not going to effectively cool it before you put it back in the engine. And that would be Cummins engine in a Case IH tractor. My brother-in-law bought a used 375 quad track, and this was about 2 years ago. He test drove it in the field. It was absolutely outstanding. He just loves that quad track. He'll never go back to a four-wheel drive. Took it home, and he did a day's work, and it was great. Next day, he was out, he pulls, I think, a 55-foot plow or something like that. So he went out the second day. Halfway through the morning, he noticed he kind of lost a lot of power. Didn't know what the hell was going on. That was a used tractor, so found a little bit more and just couldn't get the power back. Not what it was like the morning or the day before when he test drove it. So he called the local dealer, and the dealer sent out a technician. They determined it was the engine. So I actually had a guy come up from Billings, from Cummins Rocky Mountain in Billings. And unfortunately, this tech didn't have a whole lot of experience with this particular engine. It was an ISX, or QSX, and he misdiagnosed. So immediately he was starting to talk about injectors and ECMs and fuel pumps and all this other good stuff. And they changed injectors and didn't do anything, okay? So next thing, well, we're going to change the ECM. So brother-in-law, he's a pretty smart guy. He said, no, we're not going to do that. We'll slow down. We're going to make some more calls. They ended up calling a friend, or a guy, no, not a friend, but acquaintance out in Racine, Wisconsin. Racine, Wisconsin, there is a big training center. I've been taking training a couple of times out there. And there is also R&D, and that's where they actually put together the MX tractors, I believe it is. The engineer got all the symptoms, and he asked my brother-in-law one question. He says, how much fuel do you have in your tank? I said, I have no idea. He said, well, here's my cell number. Got your tractor, call me. He called him and he said, well, I got just a little less than a third of a tank. And so the engineer says, okay, take it home and bid about 2/3 of a tank, do another couple rounds your field and let me know what happens. He did that and he had full power back. And the engineer said, well, I'll tell you exactly what happened is once the fuel level sander sent a third of a fuel tank level back to the ECM figured out, well, that's not enough in there, because the ECM is also looking at every other sensor, ambient air temperature, which is one of them, and also the load on the engine, figured out that that's not enough fuel to cool it before it goes back to the engine. So we're going to cut the power. They just derated the engine. That's not in any service manual. It sure as hell wasn't in the owner's manual, so I didn't know what was going to help there. But that was a lesson that I had no idea about that, and neither did any of the technicians. We know now. So that's why, if your fuel sensor level sander gets broken on an ag tractor, it may go into an automatic default of derating the engine. So your ag producer is going to say, well, you know, this thing doesn't have any more power. Do I need to change injectors? Do I need to change the fuel pump? Well, no, just does your fuel level sensor work? Maybe you need to get that fixed, or maybe you need to put more fuel in there. Okay.
Is that just specific to that engine?
I've done some more research, and I think it's a Cummins software. So I think it's going to be particular to maybe just a lot more Cummins. It would also depend upon the application. Like that same engine, QSX is it can go up to about 600 horsepower. But QSX is an industrial version of the ISX, which is used on highway. So an ISX engine and on-highway semi, for example, we have cylindrical tanks, but we got a lot of airflow over there. So that's going to help cool off that fuel. You know, you run down the field at 5 miles an hour with the fuel tanks in the back. There's not a whole lot of airflow over that. All right. So it would, to answer your question, it's probably, I would say, with a lot of manufacturers, but it's going to be dependent upon the application as well. Yeah. So good question.
So
Okay.
in that situation, I mean, he was obviously had downtime because he needed to change injectors.
Yeah.
And so he probably wasn't very happy when he found out that
Being unhappy is probably an understatement. Yeah.
new injectors and then
Yeah, and then but that's when, you know, when they wanted to change out that ECM, he says, no, because that was a $3,500 ECM. He wasn't going there. So, and he did the right thing. He's smart enough to say that, you know, we better make some more calls. Yeah.
but those injectors aren't super cheap.
They I think were maybe $500 or $600 a pop, you know, times 6.
So,
Yeah, from misdiagnosed, and I don't want to give any bad flack to Cummins Rocky Mountain because they're an outstanding company, absolutely outstanding, and I got some good friends who are working down there. But that technician wasn't up to speed on that.
So
You know.
just in general, when a producer calls a technician, the company, and they send a technician out, are you paying by the hour? Does the producer paying by the hour for that technician's time?
Yes
Do
and
they
no.
come quickly, or does
Well, it depends if it's under warranty. If it's under warranty, then the company will be paying that technician. But yeah,
They
they're
don't come quickly then.
no.
I mean, if there's
9 times out of 10 they don't.
Right.
Yeah.
But if it's a warranty
Exactly.
issue, they're
Yeah.
like, well, we have all these other guys ahead of you.
Yeah.
Money off of.
Right.
Right.
So
Right.
it could
I
be
mean,
a
that's
couple of
because we don't
days.
have very many. Yeah, and we don't have in our area. There's maybe 2 or 3 techs that are capable
Yeah.
of doing the big work. No, you know, somebody that needs something simple. There are a few other people that work under them that they can send out.
Right.
to-
Send out. Yeah.
To do that, but I mean, if it's a
But
major thing-
if it's warranty work, pretty much every company, the technician has to be certified.
Okay.
So a Caterpillar technician, if he's not certified to work on, well, let's go back to my brother-in-law here, is that QSX Cummins. If that technician's not certified to work on a QSX Cummins, he's going to wait till someone is. You know, so they have to go through all the appropriate
So
training.
it could be some pretty significant downtime.
Well, and it's some significant money too. Caterpillar right now, as soon as that technician leaves the shop, it's $150 an hour.
Oh my gosh.
And it's $4 a mile
travel
both.
time, too.
Yeah, $4 a mile both ways. You're talking some very serious money here. Yeah, that's the diesel world. Well, the automotive world's getting the same way. I believe it's Kalispell Chevrolet is $125 an hour shop time.
Which is even more incentive for them to follow the rules and not
Right.
Exactly.
their own warranty.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And so that's one big thing I tell my students here. And I mean, I can get anyone off the street and teach them how to change parts. That's a no-brainer. But my companies don't want that. They're wanting people who can diagnose what the problem is. If I'm paying you $150 an hour to work on my vehicle, you better know what the hell you're doing. All right? You know, and I'm sorry to pick on you, but
Yeah, I would pay me $150.
but just using an example.
One
But
local technician that he works on older things. He works on about everybody, and he's always swamped.
oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, because mostly everybody has John Deere's or Case in our area, but he works on, I think, 10-year-old vehicle and stuff, and not the real new stuff most
Right.
of the time, and he's always busy.
Yeah.
Somebody who has a breakdown, I mean, at this time of year, he is running,
Just run ragged.
running ragged
Yeah.
all the time. I don't know how he ever has time to sleep, because, like I said, there's a shortage of them, and he's it. And,
Okay, he's an independent.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's where I was facing. I mean, I just got tired of getting calls at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. I just couldn't do it anymore. I was just getting wore out. I didn't have a life. And it wasn't the problem. I had the work and I enjoyed the work, but that was number one why I come to teaching. And number two was I was a technician. I wasn't a banker. I wasn't a debt collector. That's what killed my business. So,
Hopefully you saved enough to buy that island in Fiji or something, right?
well, I'm working on it. Okay, the second sensor I want to talk about is this is just for our fuel system, is what we call a WIF sensor, WIF, and that is water in fuel. And that would be this puppy right here, okay? Most of so this will be what we would consider a primary filter, which is a water fuel separator. I know it's a water fuel separator for two reasons. Number one, it's got the sensor on the bottom, but number two, it's got this little tap on the bottom. So I cannot see the level of water in here because remember on that engine we had that clear plastic bowl on the bottom. I can physically see that water. This one, I'm going to rely on the sensor. And I'm going to pass this around. If you look on the inside, just please be careful, kind of sharp, right? Look inside, you'll see two prongs on the inside of that sensor, all right? They're just two metal prongs. Now, that is just basically a simple series circuit electrically. I'm going to have current flow coming in one side, and it's going to go into that one prong. If I have diesel fuel over that prong, the current will not flow to the next prong. All right, it's going to deadhead right here. If I have water in there, now I'm going to complete that circuit. So the current flow goes out the other prong, and it will probably go through a lamp. So poof, the lamp goes on my dashboard, and it's going to go to ground. All right, so that's just going to, or it could actually just go right through the ECM. The ECM will then light up the lamp. Either way, it's going to tell your operator, the driver, whoever, that, you know what, you got a little bit of fuel or water in your fuel. It does not mean that we shut everything down here, right now, to drain that water. It's just, you know what, you get a little problem here. You probably, next time you need to get to the shop, you probably should drain that water out, okay? What your producers need to be aware of, number one, make sure the wires are in there, because if this could fill up and if there's no hooking, then you're never going to know. Now we're going to start pushing water through our fuel system, which we know is not good. The second thing is if this is coming on real regularly, you've got a water contamination problem, okay? You're always going to have some water in your fuel. That's just a given. There's no way that you cannot. It's just the amount is what we want to be concerned about. So if they've left the cap on their bulk storage tank and we had a big deluge of rain and now we're pumping that into our fuel system, then this is going to start going off, maybe once a day, once a week, whatever. Well, they need to start questioning that. It's there for a reason. If it's going off because I've got water, why do I have a whole bunch of water? We start backtracking to figure out where the heck that water is at, okay? So that's what we call a WIF sensor, W-I-F.
So if there was water in there though, what would trigger it to go off? Would the water come out? Once the trigger once the sensor is triggered.
Oh, yeah.
Why, how?
Oh, once you open this up and the water drains out, so now the fuel comes down.
So you can physically open it
Yeah,
up?
yeah, just for open this up, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the petcock on there. Yeah, good question. Yeah, so it's just a simple series circuit, just self-setting. So once the fuel level comes down, the water comes out the bottom, the fuel comes down to replace it, and now we don't have continuity between those two prongs, okay? Just want to give you a couple of ideas of so this is our cap right here. There's actually a different filter, but our cap sits on the top, and all we've done here, and I'll show you this tool, we just ran around here, we can pull this apart, then we can pull out our media on the inside and inspect it, okay? So, we pull this out, and now we can just kind of pull these apart. We look inside here. We can kind of see if there's any metal shavings in here. We can look at the outside and that one filter that Randy showed us. Never seen one that bad. Well, actually I have. Not quite that bad, but pretty close.
Is that
With,
the black slime?
Yep, that's the black slime. So all you do is you just look at it and it's going to be on the outside. I mean, there's no way you can miss it, okay? What you can also do is get out your jackknife, cut around here, And we can pull this out. Now we can lay this down. We can actually spread them out a whole lot easier to see what's going on down on these pleats. This is an oil filter. This is where you need to be looking for the metal, is down the bottom of these pleats. You'll always find some real fines. I mean, that's just the way life is. If you chunks of metal or a whole bunch of fines in there, we've got a problem. We might have a very, very serious problem, okay? This is a huge diagnostic tool for your producers. I hammer on my students and my customers about this. When I was in business, every single filter, with mine, my customer, whatever, got cut open. And I have found some pretty serious issues. I actually saved at least 2 transmissions and a couple of engines because of what we found in the filter, okay? Next thing we do, if we find a whole bunch of metal, we get us a magnet. We put the magnet in there, and if the metal sticks to the magnet, then we know it's a ferrous. If it's sitting in there and nothing on the magnet, then we know it's non-ferrous. So ferrous could be coming from different, lots of different components. Non-ferrous is probably bearings, all right, copper or aluminum or brass, all right. So there's only certain places we have bearings in that engine. So we know we've got a pretty serious problem if we're sending a bunch in here, okay.
Aren't some heads aluminum?
Yes, they are. Yep. Not so much on diesels, gasoline yet, but with my customers and mine, I don't care if it's gasoline or diesel. The filters got cut open in a conversation. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. There's in fact a lot of we have aluminum blocks. Diesels did use aluminum heads for a while, but just because of the stress and pressures, that didn't turn out to be real good for them. So these aluminum valve covers and all that sort of stuff. But the block and the heads are pretty much cast anymore. Yeah. Okay. Or pistons, actually, there's quite a few aluminum pistons out there now too, in the diesel world also. Yeah. Difference in qualities, and again, I don't want to distribute any brand name, all right? I'm just going to show you, I've got some names on some of these, but I'd rather if they weren't there, because I just want to show you a little bit of a different quality. So if I look at this one here, nice big filter. We got some pretty serious pleats in here, all right? There is actually a lot of filtering. If you want to go with square inches, all right, area. We're also held this together. There actually was 3 of these bands around. We're also got a strip of glue around here, all right. So that's actually going to be structural integrity of this one versus this one. There's really no comparison, all right. So this is probably a rather expensive filter. This one, I'm just going to ignore the name, is probably not real expensive, all right. So if you're dealing with your very expensive combines and tractors and all that sort of stuff, spending a little extra money is not a bad thing sometimes, okay, because you're going to get what you pay for, all right? Different types of construction. So we have just this regular pleats right here and these ones. This one here is actually a lube filter. This one's kind of a different way of doing things, but this is how Fleetguard decided to do this lube filter, all right? A little bit different construction. Then we have the differences in media. So if we actually cut this one open, I'll just pass this one around. This one actually has paper and it has a fiberglass in there as well. I'm going to say there's some pretty serious filtration going on with this filter. This is a very high quality filter. Fleetguard's actually a subsidiary of Cummins Engine Company, if you didn't know, right? So go ahead and pass that one around for me, please. Just again, be careful of the sharp edge, okay? Again, if it's under warranty, go with your OEMs, all right? That's what I advise all my students and customers to do, is do your OEMs. And back on this, I would also suggest that before they start dumping a whole bunch of jungle juice into their fuel tanks or wherever, they might want to check with the manufacturer on additives. All right, because if we put an additive in the lube system and something happens to the lube system and they do their oil test and they find out there's an additive in there, the warranty may be voided. All right, you really don't want your producers to go down that road. That's a very expensive road to go down.
So you were saying yesterday if there's water in the fuel and you pull that filter out, it's going to be wavy.
Yeah, the pleats will be wavy, right.
So like if that was a fuel filter laying there and if there's water in there, you would see.
Yeah, you'd actually see these pleats would be kind of wavy down the side here. Yep. Instead of this nice sharp edge, you'd actually see waves in there. Yeah. Okay, you can look for different colors. If there's impurities in the oil, this is obviously going to start getting a whole lot darker. A fuel filter should come out looking reasonably clean, all right? But if it's got a whole bunch of dark patches, well, maybe we've got a lot of impurities in our fuel, right? Water, smell it. I can taste it. I wouldn't recommend tasting, but you can. I have tasted diesel and oil. There's a lot of variation in taste between those things. Probably not a good thing to do, but visual inspection is a very, very good tool that most of your producers don't use. All right, so and pretty much all of them will probably have some type of an air chisel on in their shops. Doesn't take much just to get the air chisel out. And
so you were tasting those based on when you were siphoning your customers' fuel?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Fuel barrel.
Yeah. For my service truck. If it didn't taste good, I didn't use it in my service truck. Oh, you're laughing at me. I'm very serious. So the first one I ever cut open, I actually used a hacksaw. Would not recommend that. Okay? Because when you cut metal, you get all these fines in there, and it's like, oh, well, that diagnosis just went to hell in a handbasket. So I just grabbed my air chisel and just put the air chisel in, zzz, just put this hand in the vise, zzz, it all the way around, pop this off. And please tell them to be very careful. These sons of guns get very, very sharp. They will slice your fingers before you know what the heck, and they'll slice you to the bone. All right, so think of safety. I always wore leather gloves, all right, always when I cut them open. Just pull this out, and then you can start doing your diagnosis. Okay, if there's any, if the fills look good, you're good to go. Okay. Okay, so questions on these?
Just back to the priming of the filter. If you used new oil to dump in there, would that be okay?
No, because what's going to happen, we're just going to pretend this is an oil filter. If you dump, well, actually, where's our cap? If you dump oil, it depends on which way the filter filters. It filters from the inside out or from the outside in. So typically we're going to dump oil into these holes in here, so it's going to fill up the filter. So part of that oil will not be filtered, if you get what I'm understanding. So if I pour it down the center, and if it only goes in the center, and if it filters from the outside in, then all this oil here goes right through my engine before it's filtered. Okay, does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's why they want to do it dry now. Okay.
Even if it's new oil, you're suggesting it could still have
Yep.
some contaminants.
Absolutely, yep. And most of your producers buy oil in bulk, like either a 30 or a 50-gallon barrel. So they're transferring oil from the barrel into some container. Yeah.
That has dust.
Yeah.
Stuff on the end.
Yeah, they neglect to wipe off that layer of dust. Yeah. So it's not per se the oil, it's the handling. And I'm not dissing any of your producers because my customers are exactly the same. And they buy because it's cheaper in bulk, right? And they transfer it into these little jugs, and some are very good about wiping out those jugs and keeping them stored in a sealed container or whatever, but most of them are not. They just look in there, oh, it looks clean, we'll just dump it in there. Well, actually, no, it's not very clean at all.
Knock
But
the plastic threads off those barrels too when they're putting your pump in. And
True
they
story.
end up in there and
Yep.
they'll have to- those will be in there, they have to get filtered out.
Yep, true story. Yeah. Okay.
So back to additives for a second. On drying agents, like when you get water in your fuel and they say this heat or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
do those work? I mean, do they get the water out of the stuff, or are they just moving that water around so it passes through?
Yeah. And that's a good question, because Randy kind of touched on that. Is it this one? Right here. This is a good product. The only thing I don't like about it, right in here, it says it removes water. It does not remove the water. It's physically impossible unless you freeze the whole barrel of fuel and pull out a chunk of ice, or you heat it, superheat it, and you distill it and get the water out that way. So no, it does not remove it. What it does, it stops the water from freezing. Okay, it's still in the system. All right, so that's where this comes in, a water fuel separator. All right, so you put the additive in, which stops it from freezing, which is good. All right, but so now this that in cold weather will allow this to do its job. All right, and that centrifugal, pushes all the fuel out, and water's heavier, hits the side, drains down to the bottom. Okay, so this allows this to do its job. But no, it will not remove the water. No. Now there is going to be some water that I think it's called. It's emulsified, I believe, is the terminology. I get those disease emulsified and free floating. I think it's emulsified. That's kind of meshed in with the fuel that will go through with the fuel. There's no way to get that out. That's just the way life is. But it's really not going to hurt anything. It'll just get burned up. It's not going to, even though we're pushing it through at some very serious pressures and through the injector, those teeny little holes, it's not going to hurt those. Now the water that filter catches, that will toast injectors big time. Okay. Now remember we talked about that the fuel circulates through those injectors for cooling and lubrication. Well, to my knowledge, water is not a very good lubricant. So that barrel and that plunger that's moving, and I've had this happen more than once. So we remember that Caterpillar C12 we looked at. We pulled off that valve cover, and that's there's a rocker on top pushing that plunger down. All right. Anytime the engine gets shut off, one of those plungers is going to be pushed down. So if we shut the engine off and it's in the shed and it's been stored over winter, and this has actually happened to me a couple of times, there's a little bit of water between that plunger and that barrel. When I fire that engine up, that plunger's not moving because the rust has seized it to that barrel. So now that's called a seized injector. So pretty easy to diagnose because the engine's running like crap. Because we're only hitting on 5 cylinders out of 6. So a lot of rattling on top because that rocker's just kind of bouncing around. It's not actually pushing anything down. So that's where that is. I just can't say enough about a water fuel separator. I really can't. And I really want you guys to hit your producers about those big time.
Most newer engines come with?
Most of them do, yeah, most of them do. But older engines I've retrofitted. Raycor just, because it's a good product. There's a lot of other products out there. I've retrofitted a lot of engines. Bolted onto the block, onto the frame. You have fuel coming in one end, you have fuel coming out the other. It's plug and play. Pretty straightforward to do it. Yeah. The other thing that I should talk about too is back on either fuel or lubricants. Our producers are buying this stuff in bulk. Fuels, we might be up to 10,000 gallons. Oil, we might have a 250-gallon tote or a 55-gallon barrel. I went to a convention in Las Vegas, ConExpo, this March, and went by the Donaldson. I think you made that black filter right there. They have a new product out, and I'm actually going to buy one for the school. And it's a what they call it, is a filter caddy. And there's 2 versions of it. Number one, it was either powered by 110, or number 2 version could be powered off a 12-volt battery. But what it does is I could wheel that filter caddy over to my 55-gallon barrel, and I can plug it into the wall, and I put one end tube into my barrel, and my other end goes into either my engine, or it could go, in fact, they actually have a meter on it. It could go right into my engine, or it could go into my container, whatever. And it's actually going to double filter that oil. And I was pretty impressed with that, very impressed, actually. So you're going to have the oil going, or fuel, or whatever fluid, going through 2 filters before it goes into that engine. So now you're going to take care of a lot of your issues as far as contaminants go. Okay, so that's just on, if you go to Donaldson, I think it's donaldson.com, donaldsonfilters.com, but on that sheet of resources, I'll make sure I put that on there for you.
So then you can fill your filter before you put it on, if you had that?
You could, let's not go there. Theoretically, you could, yes.
If you're putting it in the dirty jug.
Right, yeah, and
Put it back into the
dirty
dirty
jug.
jug and then take it out there, you're still.
yeah, and you're exactly right. So now we get back to how we're handling that dirty jug. Exactly, that's exactly right,
That's why
yeah.
you need your full lube truck with the hoses.
Yeah, there you go.
Skip the container.
Yeah, it's only going to, what, 300,000 for one of those things? Yeah, piece of cake.
Every farmer.
Every farmer buys their own. Yeah, get back to you about that one. So, okay, any more questions on this stuff here? All right, so I think it's about 10:30. We're going to take a little trip, and I'm just going to kind of show you a little bit about our buildings. I'm kind of figuring that, and Joel kind of alluded to this, that most of you have not been to this campus before, right? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to look at a couple of different classrooms here, just a couple minutes apiece. And I want to take you through our engine dyno, our chassis dyno, and then we're going to go and look at some stuff over in our fire mechanics building. Does that sound fair? Okay, we'll get up and get moving around. So grab a cup of coffee, and if you want to bring a donut with you,